The following conversation is with Stefano Pascucci. He's a professor of sustainability and circular economy at University of Exeter Business School in United Kingdom, and he's also a visiting professor at Wageningen University Research. Absolutely another bright mind, and I'm truly happy that I had the chance to follow several lectures of him in reality, and I'm even more pleased to have this discussion and that I can share it with you. I hope that this will encourage future minds and to stay curious and to fall in love with science even more. Enjoy. Please, Stefano, could you tell me more about how the agriculture appeared in your life?
Well, I'm not from a farm background, although if you go back one or two generations, we are all connected to a farmer. Well, I suppose my connection came more through being a young kid going to school, particularly high school in the surrounding of Naples. That's where I'm from, the south of Italy. And the funny thing about Naples, I'm not sure whether you know the geography, but basically, is close to a volcano. And around this volcano, there is a very fertile land, amongst the most fertile worldwide, but it's completely covered by the city now. So the metropolitan area has spread so quickly. So that was happening literally under my eyes. So I thought that was quite funny that we were burying, like putting a city on such a fertile land, and it didn't make sense to me. And that was very disorganized urban development. It was very dysfunctional, you could see. So I suppose I was interested by the position of agriculture, land-based activities into society, and basically the tension, the conflict with urbanization. That's where I started being interested in agriculture. So not food, but more the territory, the landscape.
Yeah, I did actually my Erasmus in Palermo. So yeah, well, I've never been in Naples yet, but yeah, relatively, yeah, that direction. Also quite full of volcanoes, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, and then because I'm also living in the student dormitory, and some of the master students, they are wondering, maybe I should go for the PhD. Some of them, they're quite sure about it. So I'm quite curious how you decided or how you became the researcher.
Well, again, thanks for the question. Again, I suppose it started by following my curiosity. So I wanted to study about social mechanisms, social dynamics. In fact, I think my initial interest was for rural sociology, but we didn't have any module or program in rural sociology at the University of Agricultural Science in Naples. So I eventually went for economics, agricultural economics, which was a bit of a frustration, but also of a learning opportunity. Yeah, so I thought it just came as an opportunity to continue and to continue to ask questions about things that were happening around me. So after my degree, the professor that used to be my supervisor during the master's, asked me if I was interested, and I definitely was interested. So I was dreaming to become a researcher since I was a young kid. I've been always passionate about reading, investigating, that type of stuff.
Yeah, and also another curiosity-driven mind, as I can sense. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. And then so at what point then the circular economy appeared in
It
in
it
your
it came into my life, I would say, through a colleague. Her name is Liliana Rodic. It came when I started my tenure track in Wageningen. So I came to Wageningen from Naples. So I had part of my PhD. I did part of my PhD as a visiting PhD in the Netherlands in Wageningen.
it's
That
like a
was back in
sandwich PhD, no?
yeah, not not exactly a sandwich, but at that time it was really a visiting period. So I spent six months in Wageningen, and I was attending a few courses. Then I went back. It was this long process, PhD, postdoc. Was a bit struggling in the Italian context, and well, eventually I wrote a Marie Curie fellowship grant, and I got it. So I moved to the Netherlands. Anyway, that was 2008, 2009. In 2010, I started my tenure track. At that time was just starting in Wageningen. So one of the modules, the courses I had to take care of was closed cycle, closed design cycles, basically closed loops, and something that we didn't call circular economy yet.
Yeah.
So Liliana was in charge of that. She's environmental engineer, if I'm not wrong. And anyway, so she came up with this idea of closing loops and, waste equal foods and cradle to cradle, upcycling. And I had no clue what she was talking about. Literally, I had no idea. So I said, Liliana, I'm really sorry. I'm working on sustainability, but I've never heard about cradle to cradle. So could you please explain better? I don't feel able to contribute. So I remember she invited, at that time there was another colleague also interested in the module. So she gave a seminar, basically. We stayed 3 hours with her. We unpacked all the key concepts. And I finally had this enlightenment moment, the eureka moment, and said, oh, yes, that makes sense. We shouldn't downcycling stuff. We shouldn't create waste when it's not needed. We should be solution oriented and not problem oriented. And I got very passionate. And that's where my journey began. And later on, the concept of circular economy became a bit more, crystallized and known. So literally a few years later, I think in 2011, 2012, the movement started a bit more internationally.
Yeah, yeah. Yesterday I was talking with my mom. She's a geography teacher in high school, and she was like, "Yes, I've been teaching the kids 10 years ago about the green wheel, and also about the waste elimination." And she was like, "Yeah, the concepts are not new, but finally, after so many years, you can see that they're coming, growing, and they're becoming a reality." So I guess
That's right.
that's the beauty of science, although it takes quite some time, I suppose.
That's right. I mean, to be fair, while the concept of circular economy has become quite mainstream, I would say, now it's part
Mm.
of the Green Deal of the European Commission, for example, and the UK it's now using this framework quite a lot. Um, so we still haven't theorized or conceptualized this framework academically, for example. So it still is staying quite close to practitioners and policymakers. I think academically there is a lot still to be done. And usually this tells you that we take a a long time to catch up with real phenomena, you know. Anyway, that's true. Now it's becoming much more
Well,
known.
yeah, although still, yeah, I've read a lot of papers where they're discussing the, you know, how to define the circular economy and all those variations of usage, and of course by the practitioners, right? So I'm just curious. Sometimes, so two aspects, and how do we research circular economy, and at the same time, yeah, what happens when somebody's misusing the term, because it can happen either in the practice and also in the research, right? So maybe first
Yeah,
of all, how do you research circular economy?
that's a great question. So for me, and that's something that happened in 2014, 15. Circular economy has become more a context in which you know, certain theories or concepts could be developed or tested, you know, analyzed, quantified, if you go more for quantitative, or developed, conceptualized if you go for more qualitative methods. So I think it doesn't, it is not per se a concept. I think it captures, it's more of an umbrella or meta concept, if you like. I would say there are many circular economies. Um, in fact, I tend to use the plural rather than the singular, because there are different ways of engaging with concepts, practices, principles that could contribute to circular economies. So I don't want to turn into more philosophical stuff, but I think it's a mistake to come up, you know, trying to be obsessed by one definition of circular economy or one concept of circular economy. It's a practice, so has got different ways of being implemented. It has been translated in different ways, and from these practices, we have distilled a few commonalities. But still, it's very diverse. It's much more diverse than we think. Then there
But
is a dominant mainstream circular economy. That's the one who is telling, you know, that we need to minimize waste. That's the common knowledge.
yeah, yeah.
Or for many, that's how they perceive circular economy. It's like basically getting rid of waste.
Hmm. But for example, if yeah, there are a lot of examples where they're using the circular economy term, but in the end, what they do, they just recycle the products, and of course, the they just reuse it once again, and then the same loop, right? So,
Yeah,
yeah, what about
it's
that? Yeah.
that, you know, it goes without saying that any big framework or approach, whatever you want to call it, will be misused. And a bit like sustainability, but even climate change has become the same thing. So when it becomes also a bit of a common sense, it got diluted into many applications, many interpretations. There are a few scholars I've been engaging with that are concerned about that, because basically when you say something is sustainable, it doesn't mean anything anymore. So I think the risk here is that a rather powerful change-making opportunity, like it used to be circular economy, becomes also meaningless, you know, because it's used in so many ways and also contradictory ways that you define circular two opposite practices, basically, right? So that's the risk. So they're particularly concerned that we have missed already the opportunity to use it as a big impact for changing the system or whatever the system is.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not so sure. I think what matters is that we are now a bit more conscious of a few key aspects of our economies that is particularly, you know, being very extractive, being very wasteful. So, you know, this is now shared knowledge between practitioners and scholars, and I think that's an achievement of the circular economy movement, if you like, or momentum.
So, so where are we now with this transition movement, or and what are what withholds, you know, to go fully?
There is a short, long, honest, less honest answer to this question. So I'll go for the short, honest,
Yeah.
and then we can elaborate on that. But I think circular economy is now completely captured into the big business, big political cycles, processes. It's very fashionable. It's becoming very fashionable. It doesn't create too much tensions. It's the sustainability 2.0, 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever we call sustainable 10 years ago, we now call circular. So it's fully mainstream. I think in 10 years, it's becoming, you know, anyone will have a chapter in their corporate reports, sustainability reports. Probably we'll talk about circular reports, whatever, which is perhaps a good news. As I said before, the risk is that, as we have seen for other practices, this will mean justifying, covering old practices and giving a twist. Like you said before, you know, you start recycling and you label that practice as circular. That's the risk. On the other hand, anything that becomes mainstream may become also an opportunity to deeply influence, you know, things that are changing or shaping the way we do things. So that's where we are, I think. We are in this capture of the concept and the practice into mainstream frameworks. So it's part of the neoliberal agenda. It's part of revising, reshaping capitalism. That's it.
Okay. And then, yeah, so when looking a little bit more into the specific cases of circular economy, so maybe initially, could you name some few that it inspires you, and you find that this is a great way how to define it, and it's visual, you know, possible to touch it, and it's not only theoretical, but that the people can use it, right?
Yeah, lately I've been engaging with this other project, if you like, that takes, you know, unpacks circularity and really goes into the contents and the practices. So, for example, regenerative agriculture is one of those. So it takes the soil health, quality, fertility. So soil becomes really the focus of regenerative agricultural practices and thinking. And that's a neglected topic. And it was unknown to me, which you know, I've been dealing with agricultural things for a long time. So we are basically losing top soils, high quality, healthy soils as we speak. It's much more, perhaps even more severe than the Amazon forest or primary rainforest loss, and we don't realize. So we basically have built our civilization on perhaps 20 centimeters of top soils in 1 1/5 of the arable land worldwide. And in 200 years, we have been, eroding the capacity of the soil to regenerate and stay fertile and contributing to basically agriculture and ecosystem services. So that's something that interests me a lot. And there is a small movement that now it's reaching momentum on making agriculture more regenerative.
Yeah, I was checking out right before the one of those initiatives, which is called Lighthouse Farms, right? So I was looking also a little bit more specifically at the Latvian one, because I'm from Lithuania, so I thought let's check out what's happening in the neighborhood. And yeah, apparently, yeah, they are, yeah, they're, it seems to be that they're implying this quite a circular approach. Yeah, they're yeah, I'm not, yeah, I cannot recall it perfectly, but yeah, they put the waste after the harvest of the yeah the plants. They're putting it digestate, then they're using the energy from it to warm up the fisheries. Then those fisheries, they're producing caviars, and then the leftovers are being used for the biogas. So yeah, it's
Right.
quite a lot of smaller, bigger circles within the system, and it's quite inspiring indeed.
It is, it is. I think that's an opportunity to reflect on what we mean by circular, for example.
Mm-hmm. True.
Part of how we understood it previously was really, and I think that's when we met as well. It's like, being obsessed in a way of closing loops continuously, right? And keeping control of those loops and this cascading that you just described, So this is one way of being circular, but the other could be, not being so obsessed to keep all these cycles so closed and so controlled, but creating the opportunity to consider cycles in what you do. For example, uh, you, and that's basically the concept of regeneration. So um, you don't have necessarily to put back on the soil all the nutrients that you have extracted. You just have to let the soil as an ecology to rebuild those nutrients. So you don't have to close cycles by necessarily, do put back digestate on that specific soil, and having an aerobic digester on your farm necessarily. That's not the only way you can become circular. That's one of the opportunities, but not only the only option or opportunity. So yes, I think that's interesting, because if you think about that, then you could design industrial processes literally as ecology. So we have in our ecologies regenerative capacities that we are not using anymore. And I think agriculture is particularly relevant for that. So you have open closed cycles rather than closed cycles,
Yeah.
That's something we should be a bit more aware of.
And of course, then the some, yeah, I would think from the regular, very simple farmer's perspective, right? So yeah, yeah, he would hear all these concepts, and then he would say, okay, so how could I implement anything a little bit, to move towards becoming a little bit more regenerative, right? What would be yeah, to increase more rotation, to leave my fields empty, right? Or or yeah, so what would be the first step?
Well, it sounds philosophical, but it's incredibly practical. A farm is just human-made boundaries around an ecology. Most of the farmland, particularly arable lands, used to be meadows. If I think about the North American big agriculture, that was the ecology of those territories and landscapes. So if you work against that, that's clear that now you have got basically, there is no such a thing as fertile topsoil left, or very limited, or it's very corrupted. So that's why you end up in having very simplified agriculture, very specialized. It's corn after corn, soya beans after soya beans, very much dependent on external inputs. And now that we are reaching the limit of that model, on the back of an envelope, it does make sense also economically, because basically farmers are going bankrupt as we speak. They are broke basically, and they're now being acquired by corporates sometimes. So basically banks are owning lands that are empty or becoming empty, or in a few decades they will become completely empty. So I think it's not becoming green or being an environmental activist to think that you should reconcile with nature and work with nature to regenerate your soil, and basically rotate more and making more diversity happening in your farm, and try to find supply chain relations that respect that. I mean, and I think I see some hope in the supply chain as well. Even big foods are realizing that they need to do something different to protect, to help support regenerative practices.
Yeah, and I used to work in the agricultural goods distribution company, right? So of course the goal is to sell more fertilizers, to sell more plant protection and whatever. But in the end, sometimes I missed the idea that they would bring some other ideas, not just by consuming, but how to restore, rebuild the soil. And of course, there are some aspects into it being brought, but yeah, I'm not very aware that they would bring such a fundamental change. But of course, it's a threat for their business at the same time, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So that's why someone is trying to rethink, redesign, supply chain contracts, agreements, because if you change your business models from selling fertilizers and other stuff to farmers into working towards redesigning farming systems, and you become a service provider in a wider sense, well, then you are aligned with the idea of moving from a very linear, very extractive model into something that could be a little bit more regenerative. And perhaps this is not happening in the big input providers. There are few big corporates that basically sell fertilizers and other inputs to farmers, but perhaps there is space for small, medium entrepreneurs that operate locally. So perhaps part of this change could happen with a bit more localized relations in the supply chain.
Okay, and then maybe as an example, for example, if we would take a farm and we would turn into the circular food system farm, right? So what we could achieve with it. So for example, if we would reduce 50% and methane emissions from the livestock, right? The manure level we could apply into the fields, the carbon, of course, it could be absorbed by soil. Any other kind of quantifiable? Yeah.
Of course, there are a few studies that could capture the impact of going more regenerative. You mentioned a few, and I'm not in the position of giving numbers, because it's often the effects and the impacts are very place-based. They are specific, but definitely you start becoming almost net positive when it comes to carbon. Actually, carbon becomes a positive currency of your business, meaning it's not a cost that you externalize to society, but actually that's a contribution. You need carbon, carbon sequestration. Plants are made of carbon, as we know. We are made of carbon. So it's not the enemy. It's how we use it or misuse it, for example. To give you just an example, but all the big cycles become aligned with what we need to see happening in healthy ecosystems. So I think what you gain primarily by going regenerative and circular, in my view, as a farm, is becoming more resilient. You're becoming more prepared to deal with shocks. Of course, not because of the regenerative nature of your processes. Those are natural processes, ecological processes. You need to socialize those processes. So basically, if you produce, let's say, horticultural stuff or whatever crop really, through regenerative agricultural practices. So you celebrate rotations, you bring in biodiversity in your farm, all the things you need to do ecologically speaking, but then you have no one buying that stuff and recognizing the value of that stuff, helping you along and supporting you socially and economically. That's not happening. That's not creating any resilience. But the basis for thinking about the resilience is the ecological process. So that's a minimum condition or an enabling condition. And then on top of that, the farm strategy has to, or perhaps co-designing the ecological process with, supply chain processes, socio-economic processes.
So massive. Yeah,
it's
massive
massive.
concept.
That's why it's a change process that it's really difficult, and that's why many farmers, I'm really looking at this from the farmer's view. They are the exploited ones, I think, most of the time. It's impossible without support, without a system around that. Without a support system, they can't change. It's merely
Well, it's
impossible.
just it's just too complex, right? It's to change certain habits in your life, right? To stop checking your phone, it's already hard, and here you have to kind of readjust the how this farm would used to work for the past many years. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But I have evidence. I'm in a large European project on crop diversification. It's called diver farming, and it's part of multi-million euros project. So I think we have 4 or 5 projects all dealing with, diversifying agricultural systems in Europe. I think the evidence we are having is that small actions can, small changes can be coupled with big changes. So already reintroducing rotation, for example, it's a quick win. So there are low-hanging fruits out there, and this can enable, create the resources, that capacity financially also for farmers, particularly to go ahead and introduce more and more changes along. The question could be if we have got time left. We might quickly end up in a scenario where we haven't got that time left, but that's another story.
True. Yeah. But and then at the same time, when you're referring to this not having enough of time, because yeah, I started following a course which is called Sea Agriculture, and then of course, so apparently, of course, at the moment, the 70% of Earth's surface is water, and of course there's so many there's so much diversity and so many plants over there, and
Oh yeah.
apparently that had the cyanobacteria uh, apparently, but throughout the millions of years created all this oxygen, used the CO2, it created this ozone layer, and eventually um, apparently that's what we should take care and also maintain, and not per se only to focus on the Amazon rainforest, because yeah, the warming up of the climate is reducing the amounts of the algae over
Yeah.
there, and yeah.
No, definitely, this is another very good example. I mentioned soil health before, but this is another one that's particularly striking. So, um, I think that's where a bit more system thinking helps us to identify, a broader set of solutions that could tackle indeed global challenges, doing better and more with the sea, the ocean resources. So-called blue economy is another
True.
another interesting trajectory.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Blue economy, circular aquaculture. Yeah, it's a lot of fascinating topics to dive into.
That's right. That's right.
um, yeah. So maybe so since you are giving the lectures about the circular economy, right? So I'm just curious, what do you think what the students should expect from such kind of courses, and what do you think with what kind of mindset they should come to these classes, and what they should know already, or they should read before coming to it to absorb as much as they can?
Yeah. Again, good question. And of course, for any topic, there are different teaching and learning styles. So perhaps I can refer to the way I do it, and I try to enjoy and celebrate it. So I think the best is to step into the process by being open to new ideas, um, and by also respecting different views. Change processes are extremely difficult and deserve a lot of respect in this sense. Um, that's one thing. The other would be, in my view, which I found particularly important for learning, is to be open to experimentation and failure, and also, not thinking that we have got all answers for all questions. Uh, the way we started teaching and developing circular economy 10 years ago was by co-designing, discussing. Basically, it was a reading group, uh, like a book club with students. We had literally a couple of books. Now we have got plenty of handbooks and publications. There is an abundance out there. But still, that spirit of being experimental, a bit entrepreneurial, it's the way to go. I think it's you, if you come with a very conservative, status quo oriented mindset, don't bother, don't engage even. I think it's
Mm.
well, unless you want to be a bit pushed, of course.
Yeah, and come with the eagerness, because it's a long journey. Yeah,
It
sometimes
is.
it feels before going to the class, okay, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna absorb the knowledge, and I'm gonna move on, right? But apparently no, it actually shifts it changes the perspective, it changes the way you live. So yeah, it brings a lot of impact and influences life. That's what I already can face from myself when I started studying, and it was only a year, but I believe that the values, the working culture, the perspective changed a lot, and I'm truly grateful about that. And then
Yeah.
I would I'm quite curious. What would be your advice for future students in general, uh, who are who would yeah.
Uh, Perhaps two advices. So the first is to not underestimate the value of a narrative. Um, we are perhaps the only species that systematically use narratives to mobilize other individuals. We have organized very complex society by telling stories, basically. Uh, we have invented social orders, and I'm not going into the details of which social orders we have been able to invent, literally. But this is all storytelling. We have created narratives, and I think there is nothing against or impeding creating narratives that celebrate ecology, celebrate that the species, reconcile human beings with uh, where they belong, which is nature. So the change starts by engaging with this storytelling and narrative. It's so powerful and mobilizes so many people more than we think. And I think this is still a, a sort of capacity, an opportunity that circular economy could have, could retain. So create a new narrative around development, around regenerative and this kind of thing. The other advice is to prepare for big changes, but start perhaps small. There is nothing wrong in small changes. We have been emphasizing being disruptive, being radical for too long, too much, perhaps. So there is no one way or pathway to change. Sometimes small changes, incremental changes is the way to go. There's nothing wrong about that. And attached to it, perhaps sort of third advice, we live in a society that is biased against failure. We have to be cool, we have to be successful at all costs. And through social media and social, peer pressure, we don't allow ourselves to fail, to say something stupid. That type of failure is needed. We can't learn without that.
True,
Uh,
true. Mm.
so those are the three advices for future students, future people. Create narratives that make
Yeah,
sense to you. Small changes are good. Failing is good.
yeah. Well, that's a powerful message. Yeah. So
Hopefully.
then, yeah. Then finally, what do you think? What would be the habit or an action that yeah, somebody should try to implement in their lives just right now? Yeah, some small change. What would be that they could extract from this conversation, for example?
I think, again, sharing something that has happened to me, which I found a small action, start being more conscious about the things that you use and where they come from, how they've been made, and the consequences of engaging with those things. That could be, you don't have to be obsessed, but just trying to be a bit more conscious. Um, so retaining control of the things that you use, being more aware, it's absolutely important. You start ask, it's so difficult to figure this out. Where is this shirt coming from? How has been produced? What are the people behind it? Triggers powerful questions, and most of the time you don't know. You can't really figure out, which may stimulate furthermore thoughts, and trigger some change, perhaps.
True. I followed the course sustainability analysis, and we were just comparing a simple white t-shirt made of the flax or linen, right? Yeah, it's a lot. It's so many processes, so many differences. Yeah, transportation, geographical location, washing cycles, the number
Oh
of,
yeah.
wow, yeah, the hard, yeah, also the child labor is even included into it. So yeah,
Of course, of
yeah,
course.
systems thinking. Well, I would say thank you for the conversation, Stefano. Thank you for sharing your insights.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank for having me, Lucas. And well, I wish you all the best.